The air inside the War Council chamber was thick with the scent of ozone and polished metal. Holographic war maps flickered in the dim lighting, displaying the Galactic Dominion's latest conquest, a smoldering ruin of what had once been a thriving world. The warlords gathered around the grand table, their towering, armored forms radiating a mixture of arrogance and satisfaction. Victory was inevitable. It always had been. Supreme Warlord Zalvor sat at the head of the table, his dark, reptilian eyes scanning the reports. He tapped a clawed finger against the armrest of his throne-like chair. The Dominion had swallowed entire civilizations, their military machine unmatched, their technology light-years beyond anything the lesser races could muster. No one in the galaxy could challenge them. No one had dared, until now. A sharp chime echoed through the chamber. High Warlord, an unidentified vessel has entered the capital's no-fly zone, a tactical officer reported. His voice, though calm, carried a faint trace of uncertainty. Zalvor barely glanced up. Another fool seeking an audience? Eliminate them. The officer hesitated. We already did. Zalvor's eyes narrowed. Then why are we discussing this? Because it's still coming. For the first time in decades, silence fell over the chamber. The warlords exchanged glances. That wasn't possible. Nothing survived a direct hit from Dominion planetary defenses, much less continued its course. Put it on the main display, Zalvor ordered. The war table shimmered, then projected an image from the planetary defense network. A single, battle-scarred vessel, primitive in design, yet brutally efficient, cut through the void, fire trailing from its thrusters. It bore no Dominion markings, no recognized insignia. But there was a flag. Red, white, and blue. Stars and stripes. Zalvor frowned. Magnify. The image sharpened, revealing something that made even the most seasoned warlords pause. The ship's front hull was spray-painted with crude, defiant letters. U.S. Marines. A deep growl rumbled through Zalvor's throat. The human empire, if it could even be called that, was barely a blip on the galactic stage. They had no fleets, no colonies of significance. They weren't even recognized as a major power. And yet, here one of them was. One vessel. Zalvor's voice was almost amused now. They send a single ship against the Dominion. It survived the orbital barrage, the officer reminded him. A slow realization crept through the chamber. Zalvor straightened, his amused smirk fading. Hail them. A moment later, the holographic display shifted, revealing the inside of the intruding ship. Sparks flew in the background. Metal groaned under stress. And standing at the center of the chaos, adjusting a combat vest over his battered uniform, was a man. He wasn't particularly large by Dominion standards. No imposing exoskeleton, no natural weapons, no cybernetic enhancements. Just a man, wearing dirted fatigues, his face streaked with sweat and soot. And he was smiling. Zalvor leaned forward. You are trespassing in Dominion space, human. Explain yourself before I have your ship torn apart. The man cracked his neck and spoke. His voice was calm. Too calm. Name Staff Sergeant Daniel Reyes, United States Marine Corps. He adjusted his gloves, rolling his shoulders like he was warming up for a workout. And I'm here to have a conversation. The warlords exchanged glances. A conversation? After flying straight through a planetary defense grid? It had to be a bluff. Zalvor sneered. What could a lone human possibly have to say that would be worth our time? Reyes smiled wider. Just thought you'd like to know, your invasion of Earth is over before it even starts. Laughter erupted across the War Council. A low, guttural, mocking sound. The warlords had seen resistance before. They had crushed entire worlds that had sworn they would never fall. This was no different. Zalvor's amusement returned. You are either suicidal or delusional. Earth is already marked for conquest. You have no fleet. No allies. No hope. You have come here alone, in a broken vessel, to make threats. Not a threat, Reyes corrected, cracking his knuckles. A promise. A sharp beeping interrupted the conversation. The Dominion officer's face twisted in confusion. High Warlord, he muttered, our planetary defenses are going offline. Zalvor's head snapped toward him. What? Systems are shutting down. Auto turrets are unresponsive. Our targeting arrays, they are failing. The warlord stopped laughing. Reyes lifted a small device from his belt, spinning it between his fingers. Neat little thing, huh? Some folks back home cooked this up. Think they called it a, what was it, quantum disruption emitter? Disables networked defense systems like flipping a switch. Crazy stuff. Zalvor's claws dug into the armrest of his chair. You're bluffing. Am I? The war table updated in real time. Defense towers powered down. Automated battle stations went dark. Even the orbital blockade began to stutter, blinking offline sector by sector. Zalvor's eyes burned with fury. You dare! Reyes took a step closer to the screen, his smile gone now. Listen close, lizard. I don't have an army. I don't have a fleet. But what I do have is a planet full of people who don't take kindly to invasion. People who don't roll over when someone bigger comes knocking. He leaned in. You're not dealing with a species that fights for conquest. We fight because we don't know how to quit. Silence hung heavy in the chamber. You think wiping out planets makes you unstoppable? Reyes continued, his voice growing harder. Try taking a planet where every civilian can load a rifle. Where every house is a fortress. Where every street's a war zone. Zalvor's hands clenched. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. This was one man. One human. Yet the weight of his words sank into the chamber like a lead weight. Reyes exhaled, rolling his shoulders again. I came here alone to save you some trouble. You walk away now, we forget this little chat ever happened. His voice lowered, dangerously calm. But if you come for Earth, I promise you. He held up the device again and crushed it between his fingers. You'll never leave. The transmission cut. The War Council chamber remained deathly still. The holographic map updated again, showing the growing collapse of planetary defenses. For the first time in Dominion history, the warlords of the galaxy did not feel like conquerors. They felt like prey. Zalvor's claws tapped against the war table, the sound sharp and deliberate. The holographic display of planetary defenses flickered erratically. Systems that had stood for centuries, impervious to countless assaults, were now dark. Silent. The warlords had recovered from their initial shock, but unease lingered beneath their hardened exteriors. None spoke. None dared acknowledge the truth aloud. This was no mere technical malfunction. One man had done this. Zalvor's voice was a low growl. Status update. Now. A technician worked furiously at his console, his scaled fingers dancing across the glowing interface. We're attempting to restore control, but something is interfering with the system at a quantum level. Every time we reroute, it collapses again. Zalvor's patience was razor thin. How? The technician swallowed. Unknown. That word. Unknown. It gnawed at him. The Dominion prided itself on knowledge. They had dissected civilizations, absorbed their science, perfected their war machines. Nothing in this galaxy should have been beyond their understanding. And yet here was this human, effortlessly dismantling their most secure systems. A slow, calculated voice cut through the tension. High Warlord, rumbled War Chief Kaevor, Zalvor's most seasoned strategist. His crimson armor bore the scars of 1,000 battles. This may be a deception. A distraction. Zalvor turned toward him. Explain. Kaevor's reptilian eyes narrowed. One soldier cannot disable an empire's defenses. Not without help. If we assume this is not mere bravado, then we must assume more humans are involved. Perhaps their kind is not as primitive as we believed. A heavy silence followed. The idea was unsettling. Zalvor's claws curled into fists. No. Their fleet is non-existent. Their reach is laughable. If they had such technology, we would have seen it before now. Kaevor remained impassive. Then the question is, why now? The war table's display flickered again. This time, it was no longer static interference. It was movement. A crimson alarm pulsed through the chamber as a new marker appeared on the tactical screen. The human's ship, now descending through the planet's stratosphere. Zalvor's jaw tightened. His coming here. The realization sent a ripple through the warlords. Alone, one of them scoffed. His either suicidal or believes himself invincible. Zalvor wasn't so certain. Scramble the palace guard. I want every corridor locked down. No access to the command center. Deploy ground forces at all landing sites. The technician hesitated. High Warlord, with the defense systems compromised, our automated turrets are offline. Zalvor's eyes burned with fury. Then we fight with our own hands. A deep metallic tremor rolled through the palace structure. The vessel had landed. The warlords exchanged glances. K'Avor grunted. The human is here. The descent. Sergeant Reyes pulled the charging handle on his rifle, feeling the familiar weight of it settle in his hands. The battered interior of his ship was still running emergency lights, sparks falling from exposed wires above. The landing had been rough, but nothing he hadn't handled before. A deep breath. Time to work. The boarding ramp hissed as it lowered. Smoke and steam vented out into the alien atmosphere. Reyes stepped forward, boots crunching against the stone surface of the Dominion capital. He was surrounded. A sea of armored Dominion warriors stood at the ready, weapons trained on him. Towering reptilian forms, their eyes gleaming with cold malice. Their war armor was thick, their rifles monstrous. Reyes gave them a once-over, unimpressed. One of the Dominion soldiers, a high-ranking officer by the looks of his ornate plating, stepped forward. You will surrender. His voice was a growl, guttural and deep. Reyes rolled his shoulders, tilting his head. That's so. The officer's grip tightened on his weapon. You are outnumbered. Your tricks will not work here. Reyes exhaled. Yeah, see, that's the thing. He gave them a crooked grin. It's never about the numbers. It's about who wants it more. And with that, he moved. His rifle was up in a blink, the first shot punching through the officer's skull before the Dominion soldiers could react. Blood sprayed. Chaos erupted. Reyes pivoted, dropping low as a plasma bolt hissed past his shoulder. He fired again, 1, 2, 3 precise shots, each finding a target. The Dominion warriors, despite their size and armor, fell fast. One charged at him, energy blade drawn. Reyes sidestepped, his combat knife flashing. A clean cut across the throat. The warrior collapsed, choking on his own blood. Gunfire roared through the plaza. The air smelled of burned ozone, metal, and something more primal, the scent of fear. Dominion soldiers were afraid. Reyes ducked behind a fallen warrior, using the corpse as cover. His rifle was getting hot. He reloaded smoothly, eyes scanning for the next move. A sudden energy blast struck near his position, sending debris flying. Reyes grunted, rolling out of the way as more soldiers swarmed in. He exhaled sharply. Time to move. The throne room. Zalvor watched the battle unfold through the security feeds. His claws dug into the armrests of his throne. One man, one human was tearing through his forces like a storm. K'Avor's expression was unreadable. He fights as though he has nothing to lose. Zalvor's snarl was sharp. Then we take everything from him. He turned to his guards. Deploy the war beasts. Flood the palace. I want him dead. The guards bowed and rushed out. K'Avor's gaze lingered on the screen. If he reaches this chamber, we will see for ourselves what makes this human so dangerous. Zalvor bared his teeth. He won't make it that far. The charge forward. Reyes sprinted through the corridors, boots pounding against steel floors. The palace was a maze of towering archways and colossal halls, but he had a clear destination. The throne room. Behind him, Dominion warriors pursued, their shouts echoing. Plasma fire lanced past him, scorching the walls. A towering gate loomed ahead. Sealed. Reinforced. Reyes smirked. He reached into his vest, pulling free a compact breaching charge. With a flick of his wrist, he planted it against the door's surface and stepped back. A single press of a detonator. A thunderous boom shook the palace as the gates blasted inward. Smoke and fire billowed through the chamber. Reyes stepped inside, his rifle raised, his silhouette framed by the destruction behind him. At the far end of the throne room, Zalvor rose from his seat, his massive form tense. Reyes cracked his neck, exhaling. "All right, lizard," he muttered, lowering his rifle just slightly. "Let's have that conversation you wanted." The throne room pulsed with tension. Smoke curled from the shattered doorway, broken metal strewn across the polished obsidian floor. Reyes stood in the threshold, rifle steady in his grip, eyes locked on the towering figure at the far end of the chamber. Zalvor rose from his throne. His dark, scaled form loomed over the war table, eyes burning with fury. He was larger than the others, his armor heavier, his presence more commanding. Beside him, K'Avor remained still, his crimson-plated bulk unreadable. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Zalvor's voice cut through the thick air. "You've sealed your fate, human." Reyes smirked. "Not the first time I've heard that." Zalvor stepped forward, slow and deliberate. His claws flexed, the sound of his armored feet scraping against the stone amplifying the heavy silence. "You believe yourself powerful because you've slaughtered a few warriors? Because you disabled our defenses? You are nothing. A rogue insect thrashing before its inevitable demise." Reyes exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "That's cute. You rehearsed that one." A growl rumbled from the High Warlord's throat. K'Avor's gaze flickered between them, but he said nothing. Reyes gestured lazily with his rifle. "You talk a big game, but let's look at the scoreboard. Your defenses? Gone. Your soldiers? Getting mopped up. Your capital? Well," he motioned toward the distant sounds of battle echoing through the corridors. "Explosions, screams, the roar of combat. Doesn't sound too secure to me." Zalvor's teeth bared. "Your arrogance is misplaced." Reyes cocked his head. "And yet, here I am. Just a regular old grunt, standing in your throne room, while you try to convince yourself this isn't happening." The warlord's patience snapped. A blur of motion, Zalvor lunged, impossibly fast for his size. His clawed hand shot forward, aiming to crush Reyes in a single blow. Reyes was already moving. He pivoted, sidestepping the strike, bringing his rifle up in one fluid motion. The trigger squeezed. A burst of fire lit up the chamber, rounds slamming into Zalvor's armored plating. Sparks flew, but the warlord barely flinched. Reyes cursed, diving back as Zalvor swung again. Claws raked the air inches from his face. He landed in a roll, came up firing. The warlord charged through the hail of bullets, closing the distance. Reyes barely had time to throw himself sideways as a massive fist crashed into the floor where he had been standing, shattering the stone. Fast and tough. Bad combination. Reyes didn't stop moving. He weaved between pillars, ducking behind the war table as another strike sent debris flying. He needed to shift the fight. His eyes flicked to K'Avor, who still hadn't moved. The strategist was watching, waiting, studying. Smart bastard. Reyes reloaded in a blink, then fired high, aiming for the chamber's hanging light fixtures. A burst of sparks rained down, momentarily blinding Zalvor. That was all he needed. Reyes surged forward. He closed the distance, pivoted low, and slammed the butt of his rifle into the warlord's knee joint. A crack. A bellow of pain. Zalvor staggered, but only for a second. Then his tail lashed out. Reyes barely registered the movement before it struck. The impact sent him flying across the chamber. His back hit stone, hard. Air rushed from his lungs. His rifle skittered across the floor, out of reach. Pain flared through his ribs. He groaned, forcing himself up, blinking through the haze. Zalvor was already advancing. No time for recovery. No time for hesitation. Reyes reached for his sidearm, yanking the pistol free. His vision sharpened, instincts taking over. He fired, emptying the magazine into the warlord's exposed joints. Zalvor snarled, but he didn't slow. Reyes gritted his teeth. Not enough. He pushed off the ground, forcing himself to move. If bullets wouldn't stop the bastard, he needed another approach. His hand darted to his belt. A single high-explosive charge. Small. Meant for breaching, not direct combat. But at close range. Reyes didn't think. He acted. He feigned a stumble, letting Zalvor lunge. The warlord's claws came down, just as Reyes twisted, ducking under the strike and planting the charge against the warlord's chest plate. The adhesive locked. Reyes dove back. Boom! He hit the detonator. The explosion tore through the chamber. The shockwave sent Reyes tumbling. He hit the ground hard, ears ringing. When the dust settled, Zalvor was on his knees. His chest plate was ruined, blackened and smoking. He was breathing hard, but still alive. Reyes spat blood onto the floor. Damn! Tough son of a bitch! Zalvor growled, struggling to rise. But before he could, a heavy voice broke the silence. Enough! K'Avor. Reyes turned. The strategist had finally moved. He stood between them now, hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial blade. Zalvor's gaze snapped to him. What are you doing? K'Avor's eyes were cold. Acknowledging reality. The High Warlord bared his teeth. You would betray the Dominion. K'Avor exhaled slowly. The Dominion does not exist if it is blind to its own failures. His gaze flicked to Reyes. This human is not our downfall. Our arrogance is. Reyes wiped blood from his lip. Glad someone's catching on. K'Avor turned back to Zalvor. We underestimated them. And now they are inside our halls, killing our warriors, breaking our empire piece by piece. Tell me, High Warlord, do we continue this delusion? Or do we adapt? Zalvor was seething. His pride was too great. His hatred too deep. Reyes saw it in his eyes. This fight wasn't over. But it was shifting. K'Avor's hand tightened on his blade. You were my commander, but I will not let your stubbornness doom us all. Zalvor roared in fury, surging up, lunging. K'Avor moved faster. The blade flashed once. Zalvor froze. His eyes widened. His own blood dripped down K'Avor's blade, staining the war table. A slow, shuddering breath. Then the High Warlord collapsed. Silence. K'Avor exhaled, stepping back. He turned to Reyes. This battle is over. Reyes adjusted his stance, still gripping his pistol. You calling it quits? K'Avor met his gaze. I am making a choice. He gestured toward the chamber doors, where Dominion soldiers now stood, their weapons lowered. I will not waste my people in a war they cannot win. Reyes studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. Smart man. The battle for the Dominion was over. Earth had won. The air inside the throne room was thick with the scent of blood and scorched metal. The towering form of Zalvor lay still, his massive body sprawled across the shattered war table. His lifeless eyes stared at nothing, his reign ended not by an invading fleet, but by the cold precision of his own strategist's blade. Reyes remained still, pistol at his side, watching K'Avor with wary eyes. The Dominion soldiers lining the chamber hadn't made a move. Their weapons were lowered, but their tension was palpable. K'Avor wiped the blood from his blade, his expression unreadable. He exhaled slowly before turning toward Reyes. It is done. Reyes studied him. The strategist had just killed his own leader, a move that was as dangerous as it was decisive. You really think they'll just go along with it? He nodded toward the surrounding warriors. Might be a few loyalists who don't take kindly to what just happened. K'Avor turned to the assembled soldiers. He stood tall, shoulders squared, his voice calm but firm. The High Warlord is dead. The statement hung in the air, unchallenged. He was powerful, but he was blind. He saw only his own supremacy, not the reality before us. Some of the soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. Others simply stared, waiting for his next words. K'Avor gestured toward Reyes. This human walked into our capital alone, dismantled our defenses, killed our warriors, and stood before the High Warlord without fear. Not because he is stronger. Not because he is superior. But because he knew something Zalvor refused to accept. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The Dominion is not invincible. Silence. Then, one of the warriors finally spoke. What are you saying, War Chief? K'Avor met his gaze. I am saying that if we continue this war, we do not survive it. A murmur spread through the ranks. The Dominion had never known fear, never doubted its path. But now, standing in the wreckage of their own throne room, with their greatest warrior lying dead at their feet, the truth was undeniable. Reyes crossed his arms. So what happens now? K'Avor turned back to him. That depends. Reyes arched a brow. The war chief studied him. Your people. Your leaders. His tone was even, but edged with something deeper. You came here alone, not as an official representative of your species, but as a soldier. That means you had no orders. You made this choice yourself. Reyes smirked. You catch on quick. K'Avor inclined his head. That also means Earth has not yet decided how this war will end. Reyes let that sink in. He had walked into the heart of the Dominion to send a message, but what came next was bigger than him. Bigger than any single battle. He took a slow breath. If I call off the next strike, you willing to make peace? K'Avor didn't hesitate. I am willing to prevent the extinction of my people. If that means peace, then yes. Reyes nodded, then reached for the comm device on his belt. It was still scorched from the earlier firefight, but functional. He flicked it on. Command, this is Reyes. His voice was steady. A crackle of static, then a response. Reyes? Jesus, Marine, we thought you were dead. Not yet, Reyes muttered. Listen up. High Warlords down. War Chief K'Avor is willing to talk. Silence. Then, you're telling me you just single-handedly overthrew the Dominion's leadership? Reyes snorted. Pretty much. A pause. Then, a different voice cut in. One heavier, older, the kind that carried weight in every syllable. This is General Hastings. Sergeant, confirm your status. Reyes straightened slightly. Alive, sir. Situation stable, but fragile. I can buy us peace, but we need to act now. Hastings' voice was calm. Do you trust them? Reyes glanced at K'Avor. The war chief held his gaze, unreadable but unwavering. I trust they know what happens if they don't follow through. Another pause. Then, finally, stand by for diplomatic contact. Reyes exhaled. Copy that. He shut off the comm and turned to K'Avor. All right, Lizard. Looks like we're making history. K'Avor gave a slow nod. Then let us ensure it is not a mistake. A new order. Hours later, the Dominion War Council chamber looked different. The chaos had been cleared, the bodies removed, but the tension remained. K'Avor stood at the head of the table now. No throne. No symbols of absolute rule. Just a leader facing the reality of his people's survival. Across from him, Reyes leaned back in a high-backed chair, arms folded. A holographic display flickered between them. The first diplomatic transmission between Earth and the Dominion. K'Avor spoke first. This will not be easy. There will be those who resist. Warriors who see surrender as Dishna. Reyes smirked. Yeah, well, humans have a saying, old habits die hard. But they do die. K'Avor gave a small, thoughtful nod. Perhaps. Reyes exhaled, glancing at the display. So what's next? K'Avor clasped his hands behind his back. We change. His tone was firm, certain. We learn from this. We adapt. And for the first time in our history, we do not conquer. We coexist. Reyes chuckled. Hell of a concept. K'Avor met his gaze. Do you believe it possible? Reyes thought about it. About everything that had led him here. About the fight, the blood, the bodies. About the moment he had stood before an empire that had never known fear, and made them understand it. Finally, he exhaled. I think it's worth a shot. Kaevor studied him, then gave the smallest nod. Then let us begin. The transmission connected. For the first time in recorded history, Earth and the Dominion spoke as equals. And for the first time, the galaxy changed.